Hi everybody, I'm Greg Fishel. Welcome to bonus weather video number 3 for this week. And when you do a complete overhaul of your entire studio and the way you do everything, it's well worth it in the end, but it is a time-consuming and exhausting process. And it is now after 2 o'clock in the morning, and I finally decided, you know what? I just need to get this out. You don't need to see my face. The data is the most important thing. And we're going to get this out. I'll get a remote control over the weekend, and by Monday, everything in here will be exactly the way I want it to be, and we can go forward from there. But it's when it gets to be after 2, then I need to take the shortest path to being horizontal, if you know what I mean. All right, so the smoking gun for RDU. You've heard me talk ad nauseum about how the temperatures are inflated at RDU, and this has been an issue ever since the automated observing systems were installed back in the mid-1990s. So I wanted to take a hard, honest look at 5 stations in North Carolina and see what sort of an effect this transformation from human observations to machine observations and sighting changes has had on all of those stations. And one thing I also want to point out is I was talking to Dr. Gary Lackman over at NC State, who is now the head of the Department of Meteorology over there. And I've known him for 25 years, and he always challenges me to make sure I'm completely thinking through something. And I made a comment recently that more people lived in suburban and rural areas than urban areas, and he pointed out to me, and he's right, that the population density in downtown areas can be very high. Some of these high-rise apartment and condo buildings and all of that, you got a lot of people in a relatively small space. And so it probably isn't an accurate statement to say that more people live in rural and suburban areas than they do downtown. So for urban residents, the RDU temperatures could very well be very representative of where you live. If you live out in the suburbs or out in the country, I would make the argument that they are not. But I wanted to make that clarification because I think his point is very well taken. Okay, so the machines were installed back in the mid and late 90s. And these are the commissioning dates when the ASOS, which stands for Automated Surface Observing System, were installed or commissioned and said, hey, you're good to go. And so with RDU, it started in February of 96. So if you're talking about summertime heat, that hasn't started yet. So my first period is going to go from 44 to 95, and then period 2, 96 to 2024. Greensboro was at the end of 95, so summer was over. 96 hadn't started yet, so I can do the same thing for them. Charlotte was a little later, July 1st of 98, and so I made the argument that, okay, there might have been some 90-degree days in May and June, but most of them come after July 1st. So 98 was my starting point for period 2. Asheville doesn't hit 90 much at all anyways, but they installed theirs on June 1st of 96. And so again, I was able to start them 96 for period 2. And Wilmington, November 1st of 95, summer over. Summer of 96 hadn't started yet. So for 4 of the 5 stations, I could have period 2 starting in 1996. And there is one error on here that I just caught. In Asheville, period 1 actually starts in 1965. That was when the station was established at that particular location. Okay, so here's the RDU airport, and again, period 1 is pre-ASOS, and period 2 is when the ASOS was installed and thereafter. And I want to point one thing out here. You can use a trend line to show anything you want. If you want to show that something's increasing, start at the lowest point on the graph. If you want to say that something is decreasing, start at the highest point on the graph. And so this is a great way that you can, lie, and if you have an agenda, use real data to mislead people. And so that's not my purpose here. But what I do want to point out is that the end of the blue trend line is pretty far separated from the beginning of the red trend line, okay? So it's almost like what we call a discontinuous function, where you can't really link the two. There's this instantaneous jump from, around maybe 34, 90-degree days to up about 46, 47. And so that's really my point here, is the fact that those two trend lines aren't very close to each other at the end and the beginning, which indicates that there was a rather dramatic change in the way the climate was being measured, if you will, by the installation of that sensor and the sighting of it. All right, so now let's go to the overall trend line. Okay, this is all the way from 1944 to 2024, and you can see that there is a gradual increase through that period of time, which is consistent with what we've seen across a good part of the globe during that period of time, so no big surprise there. Okay, Greensboro is the one that shows the least variation, okay? In fact, it's really interesting. If you look at the average number of 90-degree days post-ASOS and pre-ASOS, Greensboro went from 32 to 33. RDU went from 39 to 56. Okay, that's another bit of smoking gun evidence for you there. But notice that these two trend lines, the end of the one and the beginning of the other, are pretty close to each other. Okay, so all in all, the sighting and the automated observing system doesn't really seem to have had much effect on Greensboro. And there is the overall trend. It's actually slightly negative, just barely. It's just about a horizontal line. So no discernible statistical trend up or down at the Greensboro Airport. Now, here's Charlotte. They look a little bit more like Raleigh with the down and the up. But again, notice the end of the one trend line and the beginning of the other, very, very close to each other. And so it's not like RDU, where there's that sudden jump. These two fit together pretty nicely. And there's the overall trend, just slightly positive. Now we go to Asheville, and using the same scale on the y-axis, you can see that everything's lower. But what's interesting here is that the end of the one trend line, beginning of the other aren't close together, but it's in the opposite direction. So Asheville, after the new equipment was installed and sighted wherever it was sighted, it actually appears to be reading lower than it did before that. So that would be an interesting study to go out there and actually see exactly where it's located now and where it was located before. And there's the overall trend at Asheville, very, very flat. And finally, at Wilmington, same thing as Asheville. Look at that big jump from the end of the one trend line to the beginning of the other. It's a downward jump, okay? So the Wilmington climate appears to be now measuring cooler than wherever the instrumentation was before. So that was very interesting. And again, here is your long-term trend, again, slightly up. So everything was slightly up except Greensboro, and that was fairly flat. Asheville was pretty flat as well. Now, one other thing that I wanted to show you is the days at the RDU airport with minimum temperatures at or below freezing. And again, the trend was slightly down, ever so slightly down, up until the ASOS was installed. And then it started to trend downward much, 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 much more quickly. And so I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that I think it's at least reasonably accurate to assume that the RDU temperature sensor was accurately representing a suburban to at times rural environment prior to the installation of the system in February of 1996. And since then, it has made a jump and is much more representative of urban environments now than it is in suburban and rural environments. And again, by the fact that those two trend lines jumped the way they did, from the end of the one to the beginning of the other, really, I think, makes that point very, very clear, that the way it was interpreting the climate changed rather radically on that day, and it hasn't modified since. All right, so I hope you found that interesting. That is bonus weather video number 3 for this week. And number 1 for next week will be coming up on Monday, and the next daily update coming up Monday as well. Remember that tomorrow, actually today, Saturday, will be cloudy and cooler with nothing more than a stray shower. Sunday looks to be a beautiful day with sunshine and temperatures getting up into the low 70s. And then we go into an El Yucco weather pattern beginning on Monday. But it is much needed rain, and so we're thankful for that. You all take care, folks. We'll talk to you soon. See you later.